for me. I'm going to trip over it, that's what I'm going to do. All right, so have you ever felt out of place? Like you didn't belong, and you find yourself in a situation and you're kind of looking around feeling like a stranger in a certain environment, that you don't feel like you fit in, that you don't feel like you're where you belong. Today we're going to begin a new series, and we're going to be studying the book of 1 Peter. So if you have your Bible or your Bible apps and you want to find the book of 1 Peter, it's towards the end of the New Testament, towards the end of your Bible. You have Revelation at the very end, of course, and then before that are 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, which aren't very long. So before you know it, going from the back to the front, you're going to run into 1st and 2nd Peter. So if you want to get that open, you can. But our series is titled Strangers and Aliens, and we're going to be addressing what that means as we go along. It comes right out of the book of 1 Peter, that phrase and this topic does. And so as we go along through this series, we'll talk more about strangers and aliens. But today we're going to start with an introduction, basically. I'm calling today, if you were to go into my office for the first time, there just to visit with me or whatever, and it's my goal eventually to have a mini fridge so I can Cokes and waters so that I can hand out as you go in there. But you might say, so this is your office, if you've never been there before. Or if you're at somebody's house for the first time, you'd be like, so this is your house, this is where you live, or so this is where you work. We use that phrase. And so today we're going to talk about, so this is 1 Peter. I don't know if you're familiar with 1 Peter or not. It's kind of getting lost in the back of your Bible a little bit. It's a short little book. And so we're going to be talking about, this is 1 Peter. Today's just going to kind of be an overview and introduction to the book of 1 Peter. So the first thing we're going to look at is the author of 1 Peter. Any guesses in this scholarly crowd who wrote the book of 1 Peter? Okay, well, that might be a good guess. So when we look at the New Testament, with the exception of Acts and Revelation, the name of the book in the New Testament is either one of two things. You have a 50-50 chance. The name of the book is either the name of the author who wrote the book, or it's the name of the recipient, the person who is receiving the book. So Matthew is written by Matthew. Luke is written by Luke. So sometimes the name of the book is the author of the book. Sometimes it is who the author is writing to, whether it's a group of people. Romans was written to the Christians in Rome, Philippians to Philippi, or to a specific person. Timothy was not written by Timothy, but to Timothy. Titus to Titus. So you've got a 50-50 chance, but you guys are absolutely right. So 1 Peter is written by Peter. We're going to go ahead and look at this first verse in 1 Peter and allow him to introduce himself. So 1 Peter starts out this way. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. And as we know, if you've read the New Testament at all, in this culture, when you wrote a letter, you put your name at the beginning. Like we do that sincerely and sign off at the end. They would put it at the beginning. So Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, strangers in the world, scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So we're going to camp out in this first verse. And we're going to start out with Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. So this is Peter. If you grew up in church, Peter is a name that you recognize. He started out, his birth name was Simon. He was a fisherman by trade until his encounter with Jesus. And Jesus said, follow me. And Simon left his nets and became a follower of Jesus. And Peter is known just as much for his failures as he is his successes. He had a habit of speaking and acting in such a way that Jesus would have to come alongside and kind of correct or rebuke or address Peter's his rashness sometimes, his impulsiveness sometimes. So he was a man of action, and sometimes that got him into trouble, or got a little rebuke, a little wrist slap from Jesus. So that is as this Peter, and at some point as he's following Jesus, Jesus says, you're Simon, but now I'm going to call you Peter. And Jesus is playing off the Greek word for rock. And with this prediction, this kind of prophesying into Peter's life, that he was going to be a solid foundation. He was going to be a foundation that would help build the church. So this is that Peter. He would become one of the primary leaders of the church after the resurrection of Jesus. So this is Peter, the first one to acknowledge publicly that we know of that Jesus was the Messiah, was the Son of God. So Peter, he calls himself an apostle of Jesus Christ. So let's talk about the word apostle then. We know we've talked about who Peter was. He, as his introduction, introduces himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ. Let's talk about apostles versus disciples. And so a disciple is a follower of Jesus Christ. Any follower of Jesus is a disciple. This room is full of, hopefully mostly, if not all, disciples, people that have chosen to follow Jesus with their life. So apostles was a more select group. So all apostles were disciples, but not all disciples were apostles. The apostles were a select group. They were more specific group of people. And there's two requirements for being an apostle. The first requirement is you had to be an eyewitness to the resurrected Jesus. So not just hear that Jesus rose from the dead, not just hear people talking about it, hear the rumors, hear the stories, and believe in the stories, but you had to be an eyewitness to the resurrected Christ. That was the first requirement to be an apostle. And the second requirement for being an apostle was you need to be called or appointed by Jesus himself. It's not a self-acclaimed title. It's not a position you can't wake up one morning and decide that you're an apostle. This is a position that Jesus called and designated people as his ambassadors, as his spokespeople. The word apostle literally means sent out. But these are the people that Jesus sent out to begin his church. So Peter, we know, meets these qualifications. He saw the resurrected Christ. He visited with Jesus. Jesus told him, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And he sends him out to begin the church. And we know he was a witness to the resurrected Christ and called out by Jesus. He was an apostle. And so by introducing himself this way, Peter, it's not in an arrogant way, but he is saying, I don't know if you've had anybody approach you. I've had a few times, and sometimes you have mixed feelings about this. But if somebody comes up to you and says, I got a word from the Lord. I don't know if you've ever had anybody approach you, just felt so motivated or moved that I just really feel like God wants me to tell you this. A word from the Lord. By Peter introducing himself as an apostle, he's basically saying, I am Jesus' spokesperson. I literally got a word from the Lord because he literally sent me as a spokesperson. So it's his way of saying I'm qualified to be speaking on Jesus' behalf. I'm an apostle of Jesus Christ. He wasn't bragging, he wasn't trying to make a hierarchy, he's just saying, listen to me, because I got something to say, and I'm qualified to say it. So that is who he was, but who was he speaking to? So next we're going to talk about the audience of 1 Peter. And when we talk about the Bible, when we talk about the audience, or we talk about the recipients of a book of the Bible, what we're talking about is who the author had in mind when he originally wrote whatever book it was, whatever letter it was. Who was his original, who did he have in mind, who was he addressing that original audience? But we know that God, in his amazingness and his sovereignty, he inspired this book so much that it still speaks to us today. So I don't want us to get confused when we're talking about Peter's writing to a specific group of people. That doesn't mean that we can't get a lot out of 1 Peter. 1 Peter is written for us too. Because that's how God in his amazingness works. Peter was writing to the people that he had in mind, but God was writing to thousands and thousands of years. Well, I may have added too many thousands, but to us. Also, God knew that this would be related to us also. His word is living, it's breathing, it's active. And so even though there was an original audience that we're going to talk about, we are the audience too. So let's realize that talking about original audience doesn't mean that it's not talking to us, but it helps us understand what's written. When you understand the audience of a book of the Bible, it kind of helps you understand where they're coming from, and you get more out of it by understanding its context. So it applies to us, it instructs, encourages, and inspires us today, but Peter was writing to a certain group of people. Let's look back at that first verse again. So Peter introduces himself, and then he says, I'm writing to God's elect, strangers in the world. We'll stop there for a second. It's funny, when the New Testament is written in Greek, and sometimes our English, we're translating it the best we can. Remember, the original text did not have any verse numbers, and a lot of the punctuation was even different. So not only are you going from Greek to English, you're even dealing with punctuation and spacing and stuff like that. So there's two ideas there. God's elect and strangers, or your version may say exiles. So there's two different ideas there. You're talking about the same group of people. So first of all, they're God's elect. They are chosen. Peter wants these people to know that they were chosen by God. They're not an accident. The things that they're going through isn't taking God by surprise. But they were chosen. They were elect. Those who believe in Jesus, those were chosen by God, adopted into His family. They were elect. So Peter's writing to this group of Christians that's scattered throughout this area. This is modern-day Turkey. These cities and places that we read there. And so, but they're scattered out for different reasons, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But he's writing to Christians, God's chosen, God's elect. And then he has this word, strangers, exiles. And this is the first hint we get to one of the themes of this book is going to be this idea of being strangers, of being an exile, of not belonging where you're at. And that's going to be a theme throughout this book. And this is the first hint added here. So basically, Peter's reminding them of their identity. You are God's chosen people, but your citizenship is not here. Your citizenship is in heaven. So he's not just calling, as we'll see throughout when we go through 1 Peter, he's not just talking about your exiles or strangers because you're on all these different countries and you're not necessarily all growing up where you were from. But as we look, he's talking spiritually. He's talking about, as Christians, we don't belong here. Our citizenship is in heaven. And we have a future there in heaven. And so there's going to be times when we don't feel like we belong here. We feel like this world is just not a good fit for us. And the reason we have those feelings as Christians is because this isn't our home. Our citizenship is in heaven. And sometimes when he says strangers in the world, he's reminding them of that. They're not followers of Christ by accident, but God has chosen them. And the trials they're going through are going to be used by God. They're not taking God by surprise. God's not just looking at their trials and their suffering and saying, oh no, what are we going to do? He's in control. He's chosen them, and he's in control. There's a reason you feel out of place. Because this place is not your home. And that's what he's trying to remind them of here. And why it's so important for them to be reminded of that is what they're going through. And that gets us to the third point, and that is the aim of 1 Peter. Why is he writing it to these people? And we don't know the exact date that Peter wrote this book of 1 Peter, but we know it's somewhere in the early 60s AD. And Peter was martyred in 64 or 65 AD during the reign of Emperor Nero. So somewhere in the early 60s is when this was written. And we know this was a time in the culture of the church of Christians that intense persecution was brewing. And it was around, we read through the book of Acts, even earlier than that, there was some persecution. It was more local, more regional. It wasn't everywhere, it wasn't widespread, but there was some persecution going on in the church, and it would kind of explode in 64 AD. I don't know if any of you guys know your history, but July 19th, 64 AD, it's a huge fire in Rome. Rome burns for 3 days, and they fight the fire, and it's not containable, and Nero was emperor, and he is getting blamed for the fire. There's rumors, there's talk that he loved to build things, and there's just different reasons and different stories of his motivation that he was to blame for this fire. So Nero needs a scapegoat. He's looking for somebody to blame this fire on to get people stopping looking in his direction. Who can I blame this on? So there's this new group of people, these Christians that have, the church is growing and exploding, and there's this group of people that is Christians, and they become a bullseye for Nero to blame this fire on. There was a historian by the name of Tacitus, and he's not a Christian, so he didn't have any Christian motivations for writing this, but he is just a Roman historian, a scholarly figure that did some writing. I want to share with you some of the things he said, and he starts with this: neither human assistance in the shape of imperial gifts, nor attempts to appease the gods could remove the sinister report that the fire was due to Nero's own orders. So he's writing this sometime in the early 100s. Again, the fire was 64 AD. So sometime in the early 100s, he's writing this, and he's saying there's this reports that the fire was from Nero's own orders. And so, in the hope of dissipating the rumor, he falsely diverted the charge to a set of people whom he gave the name of Christians and who were detested for the abominations they perpetuated. So let's stop there for a second. So, this talks about the Christians being detested for the abominations that they perpetuated. Let me kind of unpack that for a minute, because you're like, whoa. But in Christians, this reputation is developing, and here's some of their abominations. They believed in one God. Remember, this is back when, the Romans, and think of the mythology, of the Roman mythology, and how elaborate, and all the different gods and stuff, and these Christians claimed that there was only one God. There was one king, and the emperor wasn't that king. So those two things were abominations to the Romans. The emperor was it. He was it. And then all their gods that they worshipped and served. In this group, their beliefs don't make any sense. And then there were these rumors that this group of Christians, they eat flesh and drink blood. Well, if you hear us talking sometimes, but don't know the context, we talk about eating Christ's body and drinking his blood. So if you have no context to put that in, what kind of nuts, what kind of group is this? So they became the scapegoat for this fire. This is going on, still reading from the historian's point of view. It goes, the founder of the sect, one Christus by name, that would be the Roman version of Christ, had been executed by Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius, and the dangerous superstition, though put down for the moment, broke out again, not only in Judea, the original home of the pest, so they call Jesus a pest, not only the original home of the pest, but even in Rome. So this superstition, as he's calling it, because again, he's not a Christian, he has no reason to defend it or believe it. But he's like, this Christ and this was killed, but this superstition just kept growing and growing. It even has reached Rome. He goes on to talk about, after this happens, and Nero, an evil man, says, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. He's talking about the deaths of Christians under Nero. Covered with the skin of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burned, to serve as nightly illumination when daylight had expired. The story goes that Nero would sew animal skins to Christians, and then set the dogs loose and let them be attacked and eaten by his dogs. Of course, we know what the cross is about, that he would have them crucified. And the story says that he would even he'd roll them in tar and oil and use them as lanterns in his gardens at night. Evil man. And this is the culture, this is the climate that Peter is writing to these people. One of the reasons, there's multiple reasons of life going on in this time that people are getting scattered around, but one of the reasons is persecution. They are fleeing the way that they're being treated. This is the culture that Peter is writing to them. And so Peter's not writing this to address some theological, some books in the Bible are addressing, like Paul's addressing some theological issue, or he's trying to better clarify, trying to correct some heresy that's going on in the church. Peter isn't trying to address a theological issue. He's not trying to inform them of the history of their faith, but he's trying to strengthen and encourage this group of men and women and children who are facing life-threatening persecution. He's trying to give them hope. But not the kind of hope that we get today in our health and prosperity gospel hope. He's not telling them that the persecution is going to end. He's not going to tell them that they're going to be safe, that they're not going to be suffering. But he's reminding them of who they are and whose they are, and that there is coming a day when you'll be home. Jesus is coming back. There will be accountability. There will be freedom. There will be an ease to suffering. So no matter what they're going through, Peter's reminding them that they can have that hope. No matter how bad things seem to get, they can have that hope. They're not from this world. And this world is not their final destination. If you can hold on to your faith until that day. Endure. Don't give up. You're not alone. Those are the kinds of things Peter wants them to know. And we're going to see that as we continue on into this book. How do you live in this life as strangers, as aliens? I want to conclude today with trying to get from there, just kind of an overview and an introduction to 1 Peter. So how do we get from there to an invitation? I think the first thing to do is to realize that this is not just a problem of church history. We're sheltered here in our country, but more Christians have been martyred, not just persecuted, martyred, so lost their lives. More Christians have been martyred in the last 50 years than the first 300 years of the church's existence together. So even this time of Nero that we talk about, all these horrible things that are happening, in our last 50 years, more Christians have died. In 2016, there were around 4,000 martyrs that we know of. So this doesn't account for places like North Korea, places that we have no way of knowing what's going on. So this is a problem today, not just back when Peter was writing in the 60s. It's not just a problem of ancient history. We have brothers and sisters now dying or facing the possibility of death because of their faith in Jesus Christ. So our first challenge, our first motivation is to remember them in prayer, remember them in support, and to realize and not to hide our face in the sand and think it's not happening, because it is happening. But we're going to shield from that over here. And I don't know that anyone here will face death for their faith. But understand this, I don't want to be an alarmist, but if you haven't already noticed, we live in a culture that's growing increasingly more hostile to Christianity. Little by little, piece by piece, we've gone from the foundational faith, the faith that our nation was founded on, little by little. At first it was just, it's kind of outdated. Do we really need, God? Do we really need Christianity? Does that really need to have a place? It's kind of outdated, old-fashioned. But the spiral has not stopped with dated and old-fashioned. And the place we are headed is that we will be the enemy, even here in our country. Our beliefs are beginning not to just be seen as out of style, but as intolerant, hateful, bigoted, evil. We're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. So I don't foresee having animal skins sewed to our backs, but the time is coming when the church starts talking, the church keeps talking like the church. We're going to be facing some persecution. And so 1 Peter is timely for us as well. We're going to get more into that later. But for our invitation today, we're going to... let me go to the next slide. I forgot about that before I go on. There's actually, just through my research with this sermon, we've mentioned up here from the pulpit an organization called Voice of the Martyrs. It's an organization that tries to come to the aid of the persecuted church in different countries around the world. And I just happened to kind of stumble on, as I was preparing for this sermon, there's actually a conference in Indianapolis in a couple weeks. I think it's the 13th. That was way too small for me to read. 13th, yeah, Saturday, 13th. And it's totally free, but you've got to sign up to register. It's a one-day conference. If you are interested in that at all, come and talk to me. It's going to be a chance to hear from people that are living. I can get up here and say, well, I've heard stories that this is still going on today. Well, you don't have to hear my opinion. You're going to see and hear from people that have lived that and experienced that. It should be very enlightening experience. So I'm very interested in all. Check your calendar for that. And would love to help you connect with that if that's something that would be interesting to you at all. So keep that in mind, and you can get to see me if you have any more information on that. So to close today, there's 3 types of people in this crowd today, in the world. Those who are suffering, and I'm not talking persecution right now, I'm trying to change the topic. Those who are suffering. Maybe it's socially, maybe things going on. Socially, people, how they're treating you or mistreating you. Maybe it's health related. There's people out there who are suffering. Maybe they're suffering emotionally with depression or anxiety. There's people out there that are suffering. That's the first group of people. The second group of people are those who have suffered. They know what you're going through. They know what it's like. They've been through it. And the third group of people are those who are about to suffer. You just don't know something's waiting to, you're going to run smack into it tomorrow or the next day. You're going to get something, some kind of news, something's going to happen, and you're going to find yourself in that. But so we're not immune. We will have troubles, we will have suffering in this world. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you don't have Christ in your life, these people would not have survived, but since they did have Christ, there's no reason Christianity should still be around. When the enemy got as much persecution throughout history has happened to the church, it should not still be around, but it is. Without Christ, our suffering, we have no hope. So whether you are suffering now, you have suffered and came through, or you're about to, we're all in the same boat. We all need Jesus. And that's what I want to leave you with. Thanks for praying. Father God, just as we look at Peter, we look at the lives of the Christians back then, it's hard to relate sometimes to what they were going through. It's hard to relate to what some of our brothers and sisters now are going through in other countries far removed from us. But we rest knowing that you are in control. And so our only best option is to cling to you. So I pray that if anybody here has not done that today would be the day they decide to cling to you for the suffering now, the suffering in the future, the things that only you can see us through. In the name of your Son, we pray. Amen. Would you stand as we sing?